Disclaimer and warning. In no way is Legion supposed to represent an accurate depiction of dissociative identity disorder, which is an actual and very real disorder. I make sure to refrain from using any terminology associated with such disorder. Legion is supposed to represent an old-school sci-fi and werewolf-esque form of multiple personality disorder, and is not to be taken as a representation of any real-world mental illness. Legion is also a piece of fiction that depicts extremely graphic scenes of wanton violence and gore. So if you're squeamish, opposed to edgy humor, or don't like cursing, this book is not for you. Thank you for listening.
You can imagine how surprised someone might be when they wake up in a dumpster, covered in garbage at the crank of dawn, wearing nothing but a hospital gown, ass exposed to the elements. He stood up and pushed the dumpster lid open, rising to his full height and stretching, immediately evaluating his surroundings. He was in an alleyway. The brick was dirty and unkept. Clearly no one had been cleaning it. No one ever would. Happy climbed out of the dumpster and walked out of the alleyway, absent-mindedly patting his purse and checking to see if he had anything on him. In the breast pocket of the hospital scrub, there was a business card. Miss Katerina, Voidling Assistant, 7532 Gate Street, Cleveland, Ohio. The second he saw the card, a searing flash of images exploded in his brain. A snake, dead cops, a detective, cockroach people, Cleveland, Ohio? God, things were worse than he thought. His brain blast was interrupted by a peppy female voice calling out to him. "Are you okay?" Her tone was concerned, which admittedly was good. Happy's clarity returned. He found himself doubled over on the pavement. The silhouette of the woman was at his 3 o'clock, meaning she was on the steps of the store. Maybe Happy was reaching, but he already had a plan synthesizing behind his mask. "Oh God, ma'am. Thank God you're here." Happy looked up at the young ginger woman who wore a confused look at her face, which deepened upon seeing his clown mask. It wore a smug, conniving smile, a bright red nose, and blue spikes that bisected the eyes, which were hid in the shadow of the brow. He kept up his desperate guise. "I just woke up in this alleyway. I'm cold and confused and lost and just overall really scared. I'd appreciate if you could maybe tell me where I am. Help me out." The woman's look was still shocked and cautious, but she seemed to buy it at least a little bit. "You're in Cleveland, Ohio. My name is Katerina. Are you okay? Are you hurt at all? Come on in, let me make you some tea." Happy stood up and followed her. Her voice was warm and inviting, a slight Midwest accent in her tone. The accent sounded very homely. He wondered if that meant she was rural and possibly more gullible than the other Clevelanders. That would explain why she was taking in someone who seemed to be a mentally ill escaped hospital patient wearing a clown mask, zero streetwise, ripe for the taking. She walked into the dusty bookstore and flicked on the light switch, illuminating the quaint bookshop with fluorescent light. He followed her, limping. The store was the definition of organized chaos. It was not dirty, just messy. Books were laid about on all the several desks that tic-tac-toed the office space. One large, circular, central desk sat in the center, and then several bookshelves past that. On the large desk in the middle of the room, a cash register. Bingo. As soon as he made eye contact with it, he began to calculate what was the easiest route towards it. He couldn't rationalize it, but he had an inkling in his gut, a hunger that couldn't quite be quantified. Despite his current predicament, lack of memory, and overall state of confusion, all that faded away at the possibility of turning a profit. She was 5'5", seemingly 130 or so, unathletic, definitely had been a librarian shut-in type for her entire life. She set off to make tea in the back office, throwing a look over her shoulder. She saw Happy struggling with the mask on his face. Her worried look grew more concerned. "What's the deal with the mask?" Happy continued to struggle with it, making a faux attempt at prying it off his face. I just woke up with it on my face and I can't get it off." She stopped in her tracks, reaching for her pockets. "Oh my God, I'll call an ambulance and they can help you get that thing off." Before she can type in the number for 911, Happy lunged forward and delivered a mean overhand straight into the center of her face, knocking her clean out. Her phone clattered to the ground, and before her body could follow, Happy caught her and let her down gently, setting her down gently on the wood panel floor. He didn't want this assault and robbery charge to become a felony murder charge, after all. After he set her down, he ran through her pockets. A wallet, $20 inside, her debit and credit card, her ID, her full name was Katerina C. Kornovich, she was from Nebraska, seems like he was right in his assumption that she was rural, and not much else. He dropped the wallet on her unconscious body and walked over to the front door, locking it and flicking off the lights. He'd finish off this little heist by walking behind the counter, popping open the drawer, and taking whatever money he could. $300 total. Nice. That's when the alarm went off. Happy sighed and grabbed all the money, sprinting to the back of the store and bursting through the back door into the darkened break room and out of the rear exit into the alleyway. He had to vacate the premises, sticking to the alleyways. He needed to find a hiding spot. Running wasn't a great option considering he stuck out like a sore thumb, so he had to find some rat hole to stick his ass in until it cooled down. He could hear the police sirens in the distance speeding towards the store to the crime scene, and he had the feeling they might not be too far behind him. After 15 minutes, he found it. A run-down, old, ratty apartment building, only roughly 5 stories high, dwarfed by the surrounding buildings. Seems to have already been condemned. Seems like the perfect environment for someone like Happy. He found the front door to be locked, so he circled around into the tight alleyway that snaked around the sides of the building, separating it by merely a few feet from its neighbors. Happy was lithe enough. As he crept around the back, he found a broken window. He paused to wonder what might have broken the window, but found his curiosity to be interrupted by the resurgence of police sirens. Stepping into the dark, decrepit, moldy interior, he stopped for a second, tucking the $300 into the breast pocket of his scrubs and quietly proceeding through the apartment. This was the lobby level, clearly. He was currently standing in what was a waiting room, but the chairs and coffee table were smashed, water damage, mold pervasive throughout. The front desk was in similar condition. An old desktop computer sat with bullet holes through the screen, blood spattered on the wall behind it. Seems like there might have been a murder in this place. How recently, Happy couldn't tell. His investigation was halted when he heard footsteps overhead. The creaking of the floor made the footfalls even more obvious. He looked down to the ground. One of the smashed chair legs sat underneath some of the refuse. Happy pulled it out by the bottom of the leg to find that the end had been shattered and now made a jagged point. Perfect. Testing the weight of his makeshift club, giving it a couple test swings, he made his way up the stairs to the second floor where he began to search. Doing his best, and failing at keeping his footfalls quiet, he began to hear a soft clicking, like the sound of clacking rocks together, a rhythmic sort of chipping. He followed the sound and found himself turning the corner into one of the suites, a kitchen immediately to his left, and past that, a living room where dim orange light shone and bounced off the walls. Advancing further and turning the corner, he saw the culprit of the slow, methodical rock clacking, a human, or so it seemed at first. Long, gangly, pale arms held 2 objects in his lap. His head was low, lower than his arched hunch of a back where bits of spine poked through the pallid skin. It wasn't wearing a shirt, but it did wear loose burlap shorts, a bungee cord keeping it tight to his thin waist. Happy got closer, readying the club. He took a peek over the thing's shoulder to see that it seemed to be trying to start a fire, a flint and steel in its hands and a pile of tinder in a bowl on the other. Happy didn't hesitate and swung. The creature seemed to have heard it and ducked, slipping out of the way and getting onto all fours, scurrying away. Happy got a glimpse of its face. 4 black and beady eyes dotted its face at random, and a horrific toothy maw with far, far too many teeth. It hissed at him, but then tilted its head. You are. It spoke in a disgusting, jittery, insect-like voice, hissed the syllables like they tasted bad, like it wanted to get the words and letters out of its mouth quickly. Happy tilted his head. You are not human. Happy was ready to strike again, waiting for it to come within range. His element of surprise was gone, which was concerning given that he had no idea what this thing was or what it was capable of. What do you mean? Happy questioned. the table leg in his right hand, which he held behind him, ready to deliver a hearty swing should the opportunity present itself. The thing now paced back and forth on the other side of the room. Its teeth seemed capable to move all on their own like fingers comprised of bone, dancing about in its mouth, making Happy nauseous.
You smell of rift, void, nothingness, chaos.
Happy shook his head, discarding this nonsense.
You smell like I'm about to beat the fuck out of you with a table leg.
Happy spoke his line and then dashed forward with a vengeance, this time catching the spider person off guard, cracking it in the skull. It let out a hiss and began swiping at Happy wildly. Happy took the blows. Its claws cut deep into his skin, but opened up the avenue for Happy to deliver another hearty smack into the spider person's skull, sending it flat to the ground. He stood over it and drove the spiky end of the splintered wood piece into the thing's shoulder blade, causing it to send out a squeal of pain. Next, Happy let out a flurry of heavy table leg attacks that bludgeoned the creature into the floor, smattering its black and green blood everywhere, caving in its skull and breaking its bones. Eventually, after a good dozen or so hits, it stopped struggling. Happy was breathing heavily before he dropped the table leg and collapsed to the floor.